So we're in a series called Wild Frontier, and we are looking at the life of Peter, and his life was definitely an adventure. And it's a pretty powerful picture of just what any follower of Jesus can expect as they grow as a student of Christ. And it's a good picture of how the Christian life is full of twists and turns and ups and downs. Peter's life was not linear at all. There's tons of high moments, there's tons of low moments. Just he's all over the map. And it's a picture of what a life is in the adventure of following Jesus. Now, we're talking about life, and a huge part of life is notifications, beeping you and booping you. No, a huge part of life is, seeking happiness. Everybody wants to be happy. That's a huge part of what we spend our time on. That's what we spend our money on. We spend our money on things that we think will make us happy. It's why we try to earn money. It's why we try to earn lots of money. It's why we travel. It's why we make the purchases that we do. It's why we go on dates and we're dating. It's why we break up with the people that we're dating, because we want to be happy. It's why we find a therapist. It's why we find a new therapist, because we didn't like that therapist. It's why people get involved with substances, because they want pleasure. They want happiness. They want to shoot happiness in their arm through a needle, or find happiness in a bar, or find it at the bottom of a bottle. It's why we go to rehab. We go to rehab because we want happiness. We find out that the substances weren't making us happy. Everybody is pursuing happiness. It's written into our Declaration of Independence. We find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, in a place in Portland, many people would say, yeah, but that was written by Thomas Jefferson, and in his pursuit of happiness, he trampled over indigenous people. He actually talks about savages in the Declaration of Independence. I don't know if you knew that. Little fact. He trampled over Africans in his pursuit of happiness. I don't want to hear about the Declaration of Independence. But I think there's a little seed of Thomas Jefferson in each of us, isn't there? Aren't there people that you've trampled over in your pursuit of happiness? Aren't there people that you've kind of put your self-interest ahead of their interests in your pursuit of happiness? Each and every single one of us has. There have been casualties in our own pursuits of happiness too. Just even in our culture, it's the culture of follow your bliss, protect your peace, do what makes you happy, and don't sacrifice it for anyone. It's why we have a culture of chronic canceling. It's why we have a culture where we bail on people, or if somebody's inconvenient, you get them out of your life. It's probably why people leave churches. That's not making me happy. It's not me. I'm not getting anything out of it. It's not making me feel happy. On the most serious note, it's why there are mothers and fathers who walk out on their kids. I deserve to be happy. There are people we've trampled over in our pursuit of happiness, a little bit like Thomas Jefferson, maybe not as extreme as him. But the question is, we've made these sacrifices to be happy, but has it worked? I've shared with you before that this year, Time Magazine published research from the World Happiness Index saying that America has fallen to its lowest ever recorded level. That Americans are less happy than they have ever been before. I don't know what you think would make you happy. Maybe you think, if I just had enough money to be freed up, or if I could get into the career that I actually enjoy, then I would be happy. Or you think, if I could just, if I bought that dream car, then I'd be happy. If I could buy a Tesla, then I'd be happy. No. If I had enough money to buy a Batmobile to cover my Tesla, to make sure the protesters don't set it on fire, then I'd be happy. We think, if I could go to Iceland and travel, then I'd be happy. If I could go to this other part of the world, then I'd be happy. These are the things that we look to for happiness and fulfillment. But Anna Lemke, I read her book, and she's pretty brilliant. I think she had a lot of great insights, but she's a psychiatrist at Stanford, and she had this observation. Said, I'm a practicing psychiatrist in the heart of Silicon Valley, the richest part of the country, in the richest country in the history of humankind. I marvel at the gap of how people present outwardly and the truth of their inner experience. We see people who seem to have everything you could ever want: wealth, beauty, meaningful work. Yet when you look under the hood, they are miserably unhappy. See, pursuing happiness in these conventional ways, it's like eating cotton candy. It feels good for a while, but if you keep it up long enough, it leaves you feeling sickly and rotten. But Jesus says something profound. He says something counterintuitive in verse 33 of this passage. And I've titled my message today, The Happiness Paradox, because it is a paradox. But he says, he who wants to save his life will lose it, and he who loses his life will find it. And who would give the whole world in exchange for his soul? What does it profit a person to gain the whole world but lose his own soul? Now, this is a statement that actually gets repeated in all four Gospels, that whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Jesus has the audacity. You got to think about this. This is a carpenter from a podunk town called Nazareth, standing in the outskirts of the Roman Empire. And he has the audacity to say that real life and happiness is all about him. That's what he's saying in this passage, that real life and happiness is found in him. Now, Peter, who is all too human, Peter, who fails and fumbles just like you and I, he discovers in this text that true life and happiness is all about Jesus. But that raises the question, who is Jesus? And that's what verse 13 is getting into. So who is Jesus? We're looking at the happiness paradox. Jesus is wild and crazy enough to claim that real happiness comes from him. But the question is, who is Jesus? Look at verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" We talked about this a lot in our last series. Son of Man comes from Daniel chapter 7. It's a messianic title. It's the most common title Jesus used for himself. Means human being, which kind of makes sense in this passage. But they replied, "Some say you're John the Baptist. Others say you're Elijah. Still others say you're Jeremiah or one of the prophets." Then Jesus goes, "But what about you? Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Now let me set the stage for you. At this point, Peter has been a student of Jesus, one of his best friends, for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and they're kind of going for a little break, and they go up to this Gentile region up north called Caesarea Philippi. It's kind of on the coast. It's near the coast up north. And there's this huge cave up there, and it's this place where they used to worship the gods of Baal. So they're like Syrian gods. There might have even been ruins of like the Syrian temples up there. So it's got all this history of idol worship. In addition to that, this cave is known as the dwelling place of the Greek god Pan. So it's got this history of this, god Pan and his whole deal with agriculture and everything that he represented. Then on top of that, it's named after Caesar, Caesarea, you can hear it, Caesar, and it's called Caesarea Philippi because someone of the family of Herod, you've probably heard of Herod before, he's in all the Christmas movies. The family of Herod, Philip the Tetrarch, built a temple to Caesar there and named it Caesarea Philippi. In other words, he's naming it the town of Caesar built by Philip, okay? So they're this place that is spiritually charged. And in addition to it, it has this deep cave that goes down to waters, and people would joke or even say that it was the gate of Hades, the gate of death, that this cave went all the way down to the gates of death. It's this spiritual place. And here in this spiritually loaded place, filled with all kinds of gods, Pan and Baal and Caesar and Hades, all these gods, Jesus stands before his disciples. He says, "Who do people say that I am?" Now, that's a perennially relevant question. It's significant. It's a question that still gets asked to this day. If you ever pay attention to the grocery store line, it's on Life magazine, it's on Newsweek, it's on Time magazine. Who is Jesus? It's still being asked today on the other side of the world. Who do men say that I am? Now, John Lennon predicted that Christianity would go away. He said the Beatles are more popular than Jesus Christ, and he goes, Christianity will vanish. Christianity will shrink. I don't need to argue about it. I know I'm right. I will be proved right. Well, may he rest in peace, but I regret to inform Mr. Lennon that he's wrong. Because if you look on your phone, you don't have to do it, and you take my word for it, but if later you look on your phone, there are articles from 2025 in the New York Times, in Vox.com, in USA Today, the list goes on, Christianity Today, all those, saying that Gen Z is turning towards Christianity in record numbers. That Gen Z is all turning back. You can read it in the New York Times. You can read it in Vox.com. Gen Z is turning to Jesus. Why won't this Jesus guy just go away? Why doesn't he shrink? Why doesn't he vanish? Why is he always so significant? I mean, he's got a swear word named after him. you got to be a pretty big deal to have that. You know what I mean? You got to be. They don't just do that for anyone. He's a big deal. He is the most influential person in human history, and he continues to be so. And I would just say to you this morning, if you're a guest or a skeptic, we love that. I mean, we started this church so that Christians could grow in their faith and that skeptics could come and explore faith. But if you're a skeptic here, I would just say you are not being an informed adult if you never considered the claims and the character of Jesus Christ. You're not. You're not being an informed adult. We divide time by his birth. You're like, no, we don't. We call it before the common era. Yeah, Jesus made the common era common. We're fooling ourselves. You need to consider his claims. Now, some people, I was talking to a guy here in Portland and saying, Jesus is just a myth. We don't even know if he existed. Well, that was what was said a lot in the German schools of higher criticism in the 1800s. But then they discovered this little thing called the John Papyri, all right? And they found the oldest copy we have of the Gospel of John, and they did carbon dating on it, and it was from 125. And this is where the German schools of higher criticism that said Jesus was just a myth or he was a legend that got embellished over the years really got themselves into trouble. Because they'd all been saying that John's Gospel was the latest Gospel, it was the last one written. Uh-oh. If John's the last one written, and we have evidence that it was in Alexandria, Egypt, across the Mediterranean by 125, that means all the other Gospels had to come before him. And that means there were eyewitnesses alive when they were being written. There were people who knew Jesus who could be like, that didn't happen, this didn't happen. There were people who could be counterfactuals, who could argue against it. That means all the Gospels were written within the disciples' lifetime. So you can't argue that he's just a myth. Someone who acknowledges this is Martin Shaw. Martin Shaw was an atheist at Stanford his entire life. He'd been an atheist for a long time. He taught mythology at Stanford University, just south of us. I was down in the Bay Area, actually walked around Stanford campus just because I wanted to. And I was putting a lot of pressure on my son. He's 12. I'm like, you better get into Stanford. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't do that. But yeah, there was at Stanford an atheist. Well, Martin Shaw kind of shocked all of his colleagues when he converted to Christianity late in life. And this is what he says. He says, Jesus is not a myth among many. As an expert on Dionysus, I can tell you, you're never going to hear something like the Sermon on the Mount coming out of his mouth. The Gospels are disturbing. As I read the Gospels, it sounded awfully like they had a postal code. You could walk around with a map, and that sounds a little bit too much like real life to me. I thought I better stay away from those. Jesus is not a myth. He is a historical figure. And he said audacious things like the things he claims in this passage, and we all have to reckon with him. Now, some say he's John the Baptist. Some were saying he was Elijah. Some were saying that he was Jeremiah or just one of the prophets. People today, you can read all kinds of wild theories about Jesus. The people who say he was a space alien, there are actually people who've claimed that. Jesus was an alien. He was an extraterrestrial. There are people who say he was like the pre-incarnate Elvis. That's pretty cool. I don't know. Get points for creativity on that one. There are some people who actually said Jesus Christ was actually a code word for a magic mushroom. I feel like that would get a lot of popularity in our city, wouldn't it? People would love that version of Jesus Christ. They were all just taking shrooms, Peter, Paul, and, and the rest of the gang. They've said a lot of things, but probably the most common thing said about Jesus by non-Christian people is that he was just a good teacher. He was a sage. He was a guru. He was a prophet. And that's precisely what they were saying about him back then, that he's just, John the Baptist. He's just Elijah. He's just Jeremiah. He's just a good teacher, just a prophet. I think a lot of Portlanders, a lot of your coworkers, a lot of your neighbors, a lot of your friends, perhaps you here this morning would resonate with this song. It's by Mason Jennings. Jack Johnson made it popular with his cover. Jack Johnson, that like surfer rock guy, right? A surfer, acoustic, alternative, whatever. My stepmom played him into the ground, man. So much Jack Johnson in my childhood. Anyways, he goes, Jesus, I love you, and I love Buddha too. Rama, Krishna, Guru Dev, Tao Zhejing, and Muhammad. Why do some people say that there is just one way? That's how a lot of people feel. It's like, why can't he just be one of the guys? We've kind of got our Mount Rushmore of religion. We've got Muhammad, we got Buddha, we got the Tao, and then we got Jesus. Like, why can't he just be up there with one of the gang, one of the guys up there? Why do some people say that there is just one way? Well, I view myself up here as a tour guide. I don't get on this stage to tell you my opinions. I'm just a tour guide of what historic Christianity teaches, and ultimately, like I was saying about the papyri earlier, I'm just showing you like what the earliest form of Christianity taught. And Mason Jennings and Jack Johnson, like, why do some people say there's just one way? Well, I just have to be honest with you, because Jesus said there was just one way. And you can reject him, and you could say you don't like that, and you don't want to follow him, but you can't put him on the Mount Rushmore of spiritual figures because he didn't want to be on there. He hasn't allowed us that option. Now look in verse 16. Simon Peter answered, "You're not just a prophet, you're not just Elijah, you're not just John the Baptist, you're not just a guru, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Now this is one of Peter's high points, right? Because Peter just has high highs and low lows. He's walking on water one minute, he's sinking and getting rebuked the next. Like he's all over the map, He's furiously loyal to Jesus. Speaking of the idea of Jesus claiming he's the only way, in John's gospel, there's another high moment in John's life or in Peter's life where he goes, Jesus says, "Are you going to leave me too? Are you going to abandon me like everybody else is walking out?" And he goes, "Where am I going to go? You alone have the words of eternal life." So Peter just has these high moments that are epic, that are legendary. He also has low moments. But he's claiming, Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Son of the living God. And this is the kind of thing he's going to get crucified for. This is what's called blasphemy, that he goes around making these claims. Matthew records Jesus making it so clear earlier. In verse 27, he says, "All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." I mean, this is the most Trinitarian claim you could really ask for. He's saying that my knowledge of God the Father is equal to his knowledge of me. That's an audacious claim. That is such a bold claim. That is an incredibly high claim to make. At the end of this chapter, Jesus says that he's going to judge the world and reward each person according to what they have done. You can't just be like a good little prophet boy making that kind of claim. Saying that you have omniscient knowledge of every deed that has been done through history and you're going to be the one who's dispensing rewards and punishments. That's not like a claim that like a guy who gives TED Talks makes. That's not like what some YouTube influencer says, unless they're completely out of their mind. And we have to reckon with these claims. Now, very famously, C.S. Lewis said, he's either Lord, liar, or lunatic. And we already dealt with the fact that he can't be a legend. The historical evidence doesn't allow for the possibility that he was a mere legend. So he's either Lord, liar, or lunatic. And we have to grapple with this. Is he just some psychopath? Some complete charlatan, liar, deceiving everyone? Is he just stone cold crazy, out of his mind? I don't think someone could utter his beautiful words as the Sermon on the Mount if they were out of their mind. Then what is he? How could he have so much influence? Why is Gen Z turning to him in 2025? Why is he still so influential? I think there's good reason to take him seriously. I'm going to read you something by the author and theologian Henry G. Bosch, and you can just listen to it. Socrates taught for 40 years. Plato taught for 50 years. Aristotle for 40. Jesus only taught for 3. Yet the combined influence of Christ's 3-year ministry infinitely transcends the impact of all the other 130 years of teaching combined. These are the greatest philosophers of all antiquity. Jesus painted no pictures, yet the finest paintings of Raphael, Michelangelo, and Da Vinci received their inspiration from him. Jesus wrote no poetry, but Dante, Milton, and scores of the world's greatest poets were inspired by him. Jesus composed not a single song of music. Still, Haydn, Handel, Beethoven, Bach, and Mendelssohn reached their highest perfection of melody in the hymns, symphonies, and oratories they composed in his praise. Every sphere of human greatness has been enriched by a humble carpenter from Nazareth. Now, I'm always thinking of, the most skeptical listener, and you could go, well, those are a lot of Western names, Jesse. Those are a lot of, white guys painting paintings, Jesse. You could be thinking that. But hey, I got news for you. There are more Christians in Africa today than there are humans in North America. The Economist just published a front page story that Christianity is taking an Asian turn. That Christianity, it's already massive in South Korea. The largest church in the world is in South Korea. It's already massive in the Philippines, but it's exploding in China. It's expected there's going to be more Christians in China than there are in the United States within the next decades. Jesus, he can't be ignored. He cannot be ignored. Who you say Jesus is the most persistent question of history. And I want you to imagine him speaking to you right now and asking this question: who do you say that I am? If he is who he says he is, that is the most important question you will ever answer. Our next thought is, what was his mission? What was his mission? Jesus replied, "Blessed," and that's where our title comes from today, the happiness paradox. "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples to tell no one about this. Now, blessed sounds so churchy, and it always is funny to me that this weird medieval tradition lingers on of blessing people when they sneeze. but the word bless is, kind of loses its meaning or becomes just religious and abstract to us. But the word that's being used here literally means happy. "Oh, how happy are you, Simon, son of Jonah?" Or "the good life belongs to Simon, son of Jonah." Or you could say, "Oh, the joys," or the way I'd like to put it is he just goes, "Jackpot, jackpot, son of Jonah." Nailed it, you hit it. But he's saying that happiness really is found in knowing his identity. That knowing him deeply, knowing his mission, knowing his purpose. And he says, the Son of the living God. And I always want to ask you, I try to put this in front of you on a regular basis, do you really believe that God is pulsing with life? Do you really believe that the deepest, richest, most fulfilling, most satisfying life is found in God. That is Jesus' mission. Do you believe that? That Jesus' mission is to bless the nations, that his mission is to bring true happiness, true fulfillment, true life to the world. Now he says, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Jesus is going to break down the doors of death, the doors of despair, and of darkness. Jesus is on a prison break. All right, he's coming in to plunder hell. He's busting people out. Like, that's what he comes to do. The gates of hell won't prevail. Gates don't attack you. You attack gates. And Jesus is attacking the gates of death, the gates of darkness, the gates of emptiness and destruction and condemnation. And he's coming to liberate people and set them free. Yeah, that's his mission. That is the mission that he's on. That's what he lays out so powerfully in this brief statement. Now, this is the first time in the entire New Testament that the word church appears. Ecclesia. It means a congregation. It means an assembly, a meeting together of people. And the church, what we're doing this morning, is Jesus' idea. Like I told you, I'm a tour guide. I'm not here to make stuff up, give my opinion. The church was Jesus' idea. It was his vision. And Peter makes clear, I should probably say, the word Peter, also called Cephas in Aramaic, it means rock. And then a few seconds later, and he goes, and upon this rock, and he does a play on words. He switches the ending on the word. It goes from Petros to Petra, Petros to Petra. Peter makes clear, he says, I am one living stone, but you are all living stones. He writes this in chapter 2 of his letter. You are all living stones, and we are together being built into a holy temple in which God is praised. We did a whole series this past spring on how the church, the physical gathering of people, was Jesus' idea. All right? That coming together, you can't brick it up by yourself. We're not meant to brick it up like alone. Well, I go to church in nature. I mean, that's beautiful. I love nature. Heck yeah, go worship God in nature. But there's something powerful about us coming together. And if we reject church, we're rejecting Jesus' concept. His main mission, he says here, is building his church. That's what he's about. Jesus is an architect. Jesus is a contractor. Well, Jesus is a carpenter. He likes building things. And he's building his church. That is his primary activity in the world. And the gates of hell won't prevail against it. Now, I know the word church has a lot of baggage with it, because churches have done some horrible things. A lot has happened within church history. But we're going to see in this passage that Christians, that the church, can sometimes act like Satan. It's not before long that Jesus is saying, get behind me, Peter, get behind me, Satan. And Jesus reserves the right to rebuke his church. So think of the way the church has hurt you. Think of the way you've been disappointed by the news headlines. Think of the way you've been disgusted reading church history. And just know that Jesus, too, has the desire to rebuke his church. And that he has problems with the church, and that those won't go unnoticed by him. But even so, even though Peter immediately fails, immediately misses the point, immediately misses the message, Jesus doesn't reject him. He doesn't reject Peter, and he doesn't reject his church. And I would just say, we shouldn't either. Jesus rebukes his church. Jesus is harsh with his church. He's furious with the corruption, with the scandals, with the oppression, with the injustice, with the exploitation that has happened within the church. But Jesus doesn't abandon his church, and we shouldn't either. Now, this is a message about happiness, and we're saying that Jesus has the audacity to say that happiness is really about him. I love this book, The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt is blowing up right now for his other book, The Anxious Generation. I highly recommend that book to you, The Anxious Generation. Excellent. But this is from his previous book. And he says, Bob is upper class. He's single. He's athletic. He's an intellectual. He spends his time going to museums. He lives in one of the most gorgeous parts of the country. Mary, on the other hand, is low income. She has health issues. She lives in an average city with bad weather. She's married and she spends all of her free time on church activities. So this is Jonathan Haidt, a secular psychologist from New York University. And then he goes, all of us want Bob's life, but all the psychological research says that you should bet that Mary is happier than Bob. Religious people, on average, are happier than irreligious people. Kind of goes back to Anna Lemke from the beginning, right? Money, beauty, wealth, all these things that we think will get us happiness, they're like cotton candy. They just leave us with a stomach ache and a root canal. You know? They don't lead us to true happiness. And I don't know, take it up with Jonathan Haidt. Church is worth your time. Verse 17, flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. God is the one who opens blind eyes. God is the one who's going to change Portland. God is the one who's going to touch your coworker's life. God the Father is the one who's going to reveal Jesus Christ to your friends. God is the one who's going to change that family member that you've given up hope on. God is the one who opens the eyes of the blind so that they can see that Jesus is the light of the world. God the Father reveals Jesus to people. And we want counterculture to be a movement of prayer because we cannot do this in our own strength. Prayer is what changes people's lives. Prayer is the way we participate in what God is doing in the world. Jesus will build his church in downtown Portland, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. He's going to build his church. And if he's not in it, I don't want it. Even if it's the biggest church in the country, if Jesus is not involved in it, if the Father is not there, if the Holy Spirit is not filling it, then I want nothing to do with it. I want to be a part of a move of God, where God reveals himself in Jesus Christ to people, where Jesus builds his church, and if it is a work that he is doing, it cannot fail. That's my desire. Sorry, I got a little excited there. But verse 21, from that time on, Jesus began to, this is like where the record stops, okay? Because it's all really exciting. It's like, we're going to charge the gates of hell. Yeah, it's so cool. But then the record really screeches in verse 21. It's like, geez, Jesus, you're a downer, man. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day he will rise. If you're taking notes, and I encourage you to do that just because, you know me, I'm a research nerd, and your retention rate goes up by 40% if you take notes. It's like, why waste all this time if you're not going to remember it? But anyways, if you're taking notes, or if you have a Bible, I would encourage you to underline the word must. Must. He must go to Jerusalem to suffer. Why? Why? Who says that? He must. That's like he has an urgent appointment that he cannot miss. Why is Jesus on this kamikaze mission? Why is he on this suicide mission, it seems like? Well, I'm going to put it to you in Peter's own words. After Peter had all this time to reflect towards the end of his life, when he's not unstable and erratic anymore, and he's not up 1 minute, down the next, but when he's really leveled off, he writes this in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24. He himself bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, having died to our sin, might live for righteousness. Then he quotes the prophet Isaiah, by whose stripes you were healed. Here's the best way I can explain this. God is a God of love and a God of justice. And when you've been wronged, you want justice. I mean, really wronged. You know, you just ask somebody who's been horribly victimized in a crime or experienced abuse or experienced, you know, some just real travesty. They want justice. They want it to be right. We long for justice. And we all kind of cheer, you know, when justice is served, when something like that happens. We do. I mean, that's what we see in all the superhero movies. Man of Steel, he's truth and justice is what he stands for. We all yearn for justice when we've been seriously wronged. But here's the deal. This takes us back to the beginning. We have all pursued our own happiness at other people's expense. We've all wronged others. Every human being has both been wronged and has wronged others. And so if God is a God of love and justice, what is he to do? Well, at the cross, God made a way to end evil without ending us. Somebody has to pay. Sin is serious. You can't just say, oh, no big deal, it's fine, it's okay, just brush it off. No, sin is serious, and that has to be made clear. And on the cross, Jesus made it clear that he takes sin deadly serious, but he also loves sinners to the death. And that's what the cross does. That's why he had to go to Jerusalem. Now, check out Peter. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. And Jesus said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You've not had in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. It's a bad day at work when Jesus calls you Satan. It's like I'm going to go home and think about that one for a while. Won't forget that. One moment, he's saying the words of his Father in heaven, but the next moment, he's literally being called Satan. He's being called the devil. What I want to pull from this, and we're not going to linger on it too long, but I just want to pull from this is this. Don't be surprised when you slip up. If Peter can be giving the most profound spiritual insight of all time 1 minute, and being rebuked for siding with the tempter because his temptation is a lot like the temptation Jesus had experienced in the wilderness, if he can stumble like that, you can too. And don't be surprised when other Christians mess up either. If Peter gets rebuked so brutally like that, but he's still a Christian and he's still a leader and still an apostle, maybe you shouldn't be surprised when other Christians mess up either. Have a realistic expectation of people. But I also want to say this. Jesus was patient with Peter, and he'll be patient with you. Amazing? Man, there's so much more here, and I'm going to do my very best to keep this concise and not go too long with it. But they had in their mind a Messiah who was going to be a military leader. They pictured a Messiah who would bring in economic prosperity, military might, and political power. And that's why Peter is going, no, you can't go to the cross. Never, no. You're supposed to, I think Peter was kind of expecting, no, when the Messiah comes, he's going to trade in my fishing boat for a yacht. I'm on a boat. He was just expecting to be popping bottles. But he had the wrong idea of what happiness and greatness really looked like. And I've said this before, but I feel like it bears repeating again. I just want to say this momentarily, kind of jumping to the current day. I just want to say the people of Gaza are made in the image of God. I want to say that Palestinians are loved by God, that they're dearly loved, and that the horrendous humanitarian crisis that's happening before our eyes is horrible and abominable and shouldn't be happening. But I also want to say this. Two things can be true at the same time. God loves the Jewish people. God cares about the Jewish people. Anti-Semitism is wicked. But I also want to say the Old Testament is filled with God rebuking his people's injustice and oppression. I just felt like I wanted to say that. And the reason why I bring it up is because Jesus is showing us that true greatness isn't about economic prosperity. That true greatness isn't about military might. That true greatness and true happiness and real life isn't about political power. Real life is about serving and giving, not about taking. All right, final thought as the band comes back up on stage is he worth following? Is he worth following? So we've said, who is Jesus? What is his mission? And then our final question is he worth following? Verse 27, then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. They must take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? Now, this is a passage, you should memorize this. This is a passage worth memorizing. It's crucial. I mean, if you want to be a disciple, you should know what you're signing up for, right? If you want to be a follower of Jesus, you should know what that means. If anybody wants to be a Christian, this is what they got to do. Like, it seems like something worth knowing as a Christian, right? We should know, or if you're considering becoming a Christian, you must deny themselves, take up the cross, and follow me. For all time, every Christian must die to the idea that their vision for their life is better than God's vision for their life. For all time, every Christian must die to the idea that they know how to run their life better than God knows how to run their life. Every Christian has to do that. You're like, oh, that sounds hard, just sounds radical. Well, let me just tell you that in the original context, it was much harder. Because to Matthew's original readers, a cross was not a bedazzled like piece of bling you put on like in your rap video. It wasn't like a little piece of jewelry that you buy your wife or that your like grandma wears. A cross was an instrument of being tortured to death in public. Wow, that's something else. And the original Christians who followed Jesus, including Peter, who's going to be crucified upside down in Rome, that's where his wild frontier ends. They knew that to follow Jesus was risk, danger, and hardship. That to follow Jesus was, in all likelihood, a potential death sentence. And yet they did it. But you know what else we read from the historians, and you can read this from secular Roman historians, is that they did it with celebration. They did it with singing. They did it with generosity to the poor. It says that during a plague, they carried their dead as in triumph. How is that possible? Well, what I want to communicate to you is this. Your faith is worth sacrificing for. Your faith is worth sacrificing for. We started off asking, who is Jesus? He's claiming he can make me happy. He's claiming he has ultimate life pulsing through him. He's claiming that gaining him is better than gaining the whole world. But who is Jesus? And I just want to say, you can reject him. You could choose to reject Christ. You could say, I don't want anything to do with him. I think he's a bozo. I think he's a clown. Or you could choose to accept him. But I'm saying the one thing you shouldn't do, though, the one thing that you absolutely cannot do, he hasn't allowed us to do, is to go, yeah, I believe he's the Son of God. I believe he's the Savior of the world. I believe that he was on a mission to give his life, to bear my sins in his own body on the tree. But now I'm just going to give him the leftovers of my life. I'll hang out when I've got time. He can have the scraps. Just giving him the bare minimum, the mediocre, the mundane. That is the one thing you cannot do. Like, if you wrestle through the issues and conclude, I really believe he's the Son of God, then he's worth your all. He demands your life, your very being, your everything. And to do anything else is just absurd. It's just a joke. I want to show you one thing, because this all sounds heavy. Because a cross is an instrument of death. But we'll close here. It's just that taking up your cross, you're like, oh my gosh, that's gruesome, Jesse. You want to take up an instrument of torture? What is this? Is Jesus just like a sadomasochist? No. Here's something beautiful I want to show you. I showed you Peter's letter. He calls the cross a tree. And yes, it's true. If you actually choose to follow Jesus, you're going to have to sacrifice. And if your faith never costs you anything, then it isn't faith. It isn't. And you're going to have to die to the idea that your concept of running your life is better than God's concept of running your life. But here's the deal. Here's what all the apostles saw. The early church fathers wrote about this, the scholars, is that they connected Genesis to Revelation, and they saw that that cross became a tree of life. In that if you give your life to Jesus, you'll become like the one who's planted by the rivers of living water, whose leaf does not wither, whatever it does shall prosper. If you take up your cross and follow Jesus, you will see that its leaves are the healing for the nations. You will see the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. You will see fruits of righteousness and truth coming from your branches. You will discover that, yes, it is a cross of death, but it becomes and blossoms into a tree of life.